Welcome back to Beyond the Script. My name is Nikki. I am your host, and today we are going to talk about the difference between performing for self versus performing for show. So, I want to ask you this. In your life, is your performance an act of self expression or is it a mask of self protection? Think about it as we dive into this episode. Performance is not a bad thing, okay? It's human. We all perform different roles whether it's leader, whether it's coach, mother, mentor, creator, all of these things are different types of roles in which we perform in our life. But it's the intent behind the performance that is going to determine whether it is authentic or whether it is performative. And in this episode, we're going to explore performing for self versus performing for approval. And the answer to either or is going to uncover what your current level of self-trust is. Let's start with some definitions because you all know I like a good definition. So to perform is to execute or to entertain, right? Whereas a performer is one who expresses for an audience. But when does performing cross from sacred expression and into survival mode? When does performing no longer serve our sense of self, but it crosses into playing these roles for others the way that an entertainer would? Okay, especially when you think about creative expression. If you look at this through the lens of art, a performer, like an actress, may go and play a character to entertain the audience. And when the show is over, she takes her mask off and she goes back to herself. So, where in your life are you performing as if it's a stage, or are you actually just performing because it is your sense of self? When we perform for self, we are embodying who we are. Okay. We are doing things to say, when I speak, when I move, when I create, I am not seeking applause from anybody. I'm simply witnessing myself. Like I said, the connection to dancers, speakers, and creators, they will perform because their body is an instrument of truth, right? And those are separate sometimes from being an actor or an actress. Okay. When you have self-trust in your performance, you don't need an audience to validate your art. Your art in this instance being your essence. You trust your own rhythm, you trust your message, and you trust your impact before anybody claps for you. You trust the production of your life. Okay? Now, when we're being performative for others, that is when expression is more about perception than it is authenticity. That is when we do things like posting what sounds empowered instead of what feels true. That's when we say things like, I'm fine, to maintain an image, right? That's when we over explain our choices because we're seeking validation instead of fully trusting ourselves. So that's when being the performer becomes an outward task and we're performing for a reaction. In theater, when there's, a play, they perform for a reaction. You want an audience applause. You want the audience to cheer. You want the audience to feel something, right? And that's not to say that if you are performing in life, even with a full sense of self-trust and stuff, that sometimes those things are not necessary for what you're doing. But when you're seeking that, like I said, in the essence of like an actress, for example, you're putting on a mask to put on a show versus a dancer. Do they want a reaction? Maybe. Usually less, but maybe. But what they really want is to tell a story, to express themselves, okay, through storytelling, which in this example is dance. So when we've learned to perform in order to survive or to be accepted or to belong, then that is when we're putting masks on in our life. That is when we are being an actress or an actor in our life and we're not actually, playing our true role. We become a supporting character of sorts in our own, in our own essence. And so when we want to reclaim being a performer in terms of like, I'm a high performer and I do what is best for me, whether people are clapping or not, we have to get back into our own, one, creative essence, and two, we have to get back into our own like creative expression and our own sense of self-trust. When we can trust ourselves to put our work out there and we can trust ourselves to be able to do things, then we're only performing for ourselves. We're performing the roles and identities that we were handed, but we're creating what that looks like. And that's the biggest thing. When you create what that looks like, you're not seeking the audience's approval. You're not seeking the cheers or the clapping or anything. Those will come as a byproduct because you will find your people. You will find, the people interested in what it is that you're doing. But it's not the purpose of it. You're not doing it for that. You're not doing it for the validation. Okay? You're doing it because it's who you are and it's what you are. So now that we've kind of established some of those archetypes, I'm going to give you some homework, if you will. This episode is super short. It's just something that was, really like just on my heart to talk about and compare. And those are the key points that I wanted to make, is the difference in being a performer for your own life versus being performative for other people's reactions. And so, like I said, this episode is short because it's a lot more about self-reflection. And what I want you to do next is I want you to go back to the original question that I asked you, which is your performance an act of self-expression or a mask of self-protection? Are you putting things out there to protect yourself and your feelings and your emotions and your true essence? Or are you putting things out there that are rooted in self-expression and who you are? Alongside of that question, and I want you to write that down, but alongside of that question, I want you to also ask yourself, am I performing my truth or am I performing for acceptance? Does this version of me feel rooted or rehearsed? Okay, so take a notebook out, write any of those three questions on the top of your page and set a timer for like 10 minutes and just journal on it and see what comes through. And ask yourself, if you are being performative for others, ask yourself, what does performing in your own truth look like? What is it that you need to embody and do to be the main character who is himself? In acting classes, I think they called that a ingenue. I've got it all butchered. It was something like that. But basically what it meant was, there are certain actors in Hollywood that when they play roles, they essentially just play themselves in different ways in multiple roles. The first one that really sticks out at me is The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Will Smith is Will Smith in that show, right? He's an actor playing himself and being himself. And so it's the same thing. In your life, are you the character actually being yourself, or are you putting on a role and a mask to appease to somebody else? So journal on that a little bit. And when you come back with an answer, you can send me a DM on Substack. My username is @NikkiLynn Send me a DM and let me know what happens. If you are finding in this, like, hey, you know what? I am performing for others and I want to learn how to trust myself. If you subscribe to my Substack for free, I have a 5-day identity rewrite challenge, which is 5 days to rebuild self-trust and self-confidence. When you can do that, you then take back the identity of the performer for your sense of self, not putting it out for somebody else, and not as a defense mechanism based on whatever it is that you're protecting in your identity. So thank you for tuning in to this very short episode. There's like a dual episode today. There is a bonus episode out. If you are listening, there is a bonus episode out today that went into why you don't trust yourself, which is why this one is the short and more polished version. But there's a live episode that went out about why you don't trust yourself. That one is about a half-hour listen. You can grab that and listen to it right here on all of the same podcast apps. Plus, you can come over to my Substack and watch the video if you wish. And as always, I will talk to you guys next week. Bye.